He has a new office. I haven't put stuff in the space yet.
All right. I'll buy that.
I mean, I put some stuff in the space. I have a little Ganesha, a screaming goat, a doll that my kid gave me, and a cool lament configuration from Hellraiser that a patient gave me.
The most important things. What's up? What's up? Good evening, everyone. It is no, everybody wants to know. I wanted to know. Inquiring minds want to know what's on John's shelves. It is 7 p.m. on the East Coast, Tuesday, June 4th. Welcome to our OCD 102 Town Hall. As always, please take a couple minutes, get settled. If you're already here, let us know you're here. Say hi, where you're from. I see Beth Carducci in the house. Her hermit crabs bought some IOCDF merch. I didn't know we had hermit crab hoodies. I'm down. Can you take pictures of your hermit crabs in the merch, Beth? I think that'd be awesome. Nathan is in the house. Mike Sizemore is here. Hi, Mike. Good to see you. Oops. And we lost Ez. Well, that's what happens sometimes. No, Ez will be back. Hi, Ez. There she is.
Sorry about that.
You're fine. You're fine. So if you're just joining us, please say hello. Let us know you're here. We'll get to, oh, hi, Mom. We'll get started in about 30, 45 seconds. I'm tuning in from Northern Virginia. Well, thank you, Maya. I appreciate your being here. We have a great panel for y'all today, and really a lot of brilliant people. So get your questions ready, because you'll get good answers. Matt Bannister, 7:01 p.m. What's up? It's good to see you, Matt. Valerie Andrews is here. Yay, lots and lots of our favorite folks. So good to see you all. Let's go ahead. Hi, Amy Ellickson in Wisconsin. It's good to see you, Amy. So with that, let's get started to get through some housekeeping, and then we'll jump into it. We have lots to talk about, and I know the time always goes quick. Hi, Robert Spence. All right. So my name is Ethan. I'm a national advocate for the International OCD Foundation. Welcome to OCD 102 Town Hall. Just some quick housekeeping. This town hall is intended to serve as educational content and is not intended to replace therapy. For treatment-related questions, please be sure to work with your local provider or contact a local clinician. The IOCDF is not a crisis hotline. If you are in crisis or ever feeling suicidal or unsafe, please go to your local emergency room or call 911 or the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988. As always, we want to create a safe space and be kind to everyone here. At the end of the day, we're all here to support one another. Please note this is being broadcast on several social media platforms, so keep that in mind as you ask questions and talk about personal information. With all of that, see, done, happened quick. Hi, Stasia. Good to see you from Mexico City. So I would love to introduce our panel today, and then we can dive into conversation and questions. So first, I want to introduce Denise Egan-Sack. Denise has been on the IOCDF Board of Directors since 2007, so since she was 6 years old, serving in the role of Secretary and President. She has been actively involved in expanding IOCDF programming, including developing pediatric curriculum for the annual conference and the Anxiety in Classroom website and training. In addition, she was elected onto the Scientific and Clinical Advisory Board in 2018. Denise has been a therapist for people with OCD and anxiety for over 25 years and was a founding member of the McLean Hospital OCD Institute in 1997. She has presented and trained clinicians and educators on cognitive behavioral therapy and acceptance and commitment therapy for OCD and related disorders nationally and internationally. Thank you, Denise.
I'm so happy to be here.
We're honored to have you. Next, we have Ez Hominoff. Ez currently works as a certified school psychologist in the public schools of New Haven. I didn't know you lived in New Haven. Oh my gosh, I go all the time. We have to say hi. Anyway, prior to this, Ez worked as an academic coach, disability support services assistant, and early literacy intervention. I would mess up on the word literacy interventionist, working with elementary through college age students throughout their many years of experience. Outside of working with their students, Ez has been a proud proponent of mental health awareness and an IOCDF advocate for many years. Jump-started once they themselves were diagnosed with OCD at 12 years old. Their goal, both in their career and their advocacy, is to make others feel heard, understood, and valued. And I can second that Ez has been a major proponent and player in the IOCDF Advocate Program, and we've loved having them. How are you, Ez?
I'm doing well, thank you. You just made my day.
Oh my gosh, stop. Okay. Next, we have Ali Garza. Ali is the clinical coordinator at the OCD and Anxiety Intensive Outpatient Program at the University of Colorado Anschutz, and holds an MSW from the University of Washington in Seattle. Her clinical interests include providing neurodivergent affirming care for comorbidities such as ADHD and ASD, working with youth, parents, and taking a think outside the box approach to providing individualized evidence-based care. Ali has worked in various clinical roles, including crisis mobile response, suicide prevention, and at all levels of care, outpatient, IOP, PHP, and residential with OCD and anxiety-related disorders. Ali has lived experience with severe OCD, and outside of her clinical work is an IOCDF advocate. She is especially passionate about ERP treatment accessibility, demystifying higher levels of care, and destigmatizing taboo themes. She lives with her husband, Adrian, and 2 chihuahuas in Denver, Colorado. Hi, Ali.
Hello. Need to shorten that a little bit next time, but thank you for the
introduction. I should have read faster. I'm a little tired at the end of the day.
I really like demystifying higher levels of care. I want to know more about that. That sounds so cool.
Maybe we'll dive into it, and we'll leave the chihuahuas out of the conversation today.
I like it. I'm a cat dad, but wait till you hear the length of John's bio. No, I'm kidding. Pretty short. John Hirschfield is the director of the Center for OCD and Anxiety at Shepherd Pratt. He specializes in the use of mindfulness and cognitive behavioral therapy for obsessive compulsive disorder and related disorders. John is a member of the Scientific and Clinical Advisory Board of the International OCD Foundation and is on the faculty of their own Behavioral Therapy Training Institute. He is the author of Overcoming Harm OCD, When a Family Member Has OCD, and the OCD Workbook for Teens, and co-authored the Mindfulness Workbook for OCD, Everyday Mindfulness for OCD, and the Unwanted Thoughts and Intense Emotions Workbook. John, we're grateful to have you.
Happy to be here.
All right. So as always, I hope you ask lots and lots of questions, so feel free to load the comment thread. But I think we'll get started with the basics. And for those of you that don't mind, so let's just start from the beginning. I think it's a good reminder. John Hirschfield, what is OCD?
I wasn't ready for that one.
I know.
Yeah. What is OCD? Okay. OCD is a common psychiatric condition characterized by what's in the name, which is obsessions and compulsions. Obsessions are unwanted, intrusive thoughts that are bothersome, that are upsetting, that are repetitive, that typically the person experiencing them finds them sort of incompatible with how they would normally view the world, where they're not having them. These thoughts cause them various types of distress, could be anxiety, could be disgust, could be some other kind of discomfort. And then they try to get this distress to go down by engaging in some sort of behavior called a compulsion. It could be a mental behavior or physical behavior to get the distress down, specifically by increasing certainty about the content of the offending obsessive thought. Right? If I could reassure myself or somehow convince myself that I'm not going to be burdened by this thought, then I'm going to feel better. And that, of course, provides the temporary relief that then conditions the mind to think that you need that relief all the time as a strategy for dealing with the thought. And around we go. Called a disorder because even though everybody has unwanted thoughts and engages in rituals, only people with OCD find it impairing and detrimental to their quality of life. And it's treatable.
Is it? That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. It is. It's. They say it's one of the most treatable mental health conditions there is. Is that correct?
I believe that to be the case, and that's also been my experience. I love this work. I love working with people who have OCD, and I love that you can see people kind of evolve in real time and reclaim their life from the OCD. You know, I'm taking this back, and now I'm taking this back, and it's very, very rewarding work that we do.
I think that leads with some wonderful hope about. I think that's fantastic, and I have my own thoughts on that. But let's go to Ez. So Ez, do you mind sharing a little bit about your own journey with OCD?
Yeah, sure. I was diagnosed with OCD when I was in 6th grade, about 12 years old. So I think that's actually considered relatively young. And especially back in 2008, it was very young at the time. And before that, I had symptoms for several years. Probably, I used to say starting in 3rd grade was when I remember my first compulsions. But I think I actually might have had them even in kindergarten, like as early as kindergarten. I realized that I was anxious about going into the bathroom at school because I was worried that I would get like sick from the germs in the bathroom. And then it kind of sort of slowly evolved from that avoidance into like fully fledged of obsessions and compulsions around 8 or 9 years old. There was like kind of a turning point when I was 11 years old where they were really impacting my life. And I thought I had been keeping it pretty hidden. But I think at about that time, I was staying up hours every night doing compulsions. I was doing compulsions in the morning when I woke up. I had compulsions for getting dressed, for the breakfast table, and all the way into school. And then at school, I was doing compulsions. It took over my whole life. And I started treatment the summer of my beginning of 7th grade. And I worked with a psychologist who worked with adolescents and adults with OCD, and knew of ERP at that point, which was really hard for us to find because back in 2008, it was crazy how few treatment providers there were for children and even young adults in the New Jersey area, which is where I grew up. So I actually remember going into New York City for treatment, and that's where my psychiatrist was. I actually still see the same psychiatrist that I saw when I was 12 years old. So shout out to her, game changer there. But I remember my parents and my sister were also like, they just did everything they could to sort of support me in the recovery. I had really, really severe emetophobia, so fear of throwing up. And it was so bad that at a certain point, I remember I couldn't say the word throwing up. I couldn't use any synonyms for that. And then I started not being able to use the letters related to throwing up. So like I couldn't name characters in my creative writing with any letters that had the same letter as a letter of a synonym for throwing up. So like I remember when I finally tackled that fear, which was kind of the root of the OCD at the time, I was about 19 or 20 years old. So it really took several years to get to a point where I was able to finally admit that I was ready to tackle that fear. And I had gone through ERP for kind of the external compulsions, so like the tapping and the organizing and straightening that I was doing, but I wasn't able to tackle the fear itself until I was in college. So it really took a long time. But at this point in my OCD journey, I can really safely say that I am so far from where I was, and it took me a long time to get here. But right now I work with students with OCD at the school I work at, and like that is the most meaningful work I do sometimes, where I have students and I can say, I get what you're going through, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And, I don't have to go into detail, but kids understand that I understand. And I think I'm able to build that rapport now because I've been through that hell and back.
Thank you so much for sharing, Ez. And I guess there's some truth to what John said about it being treatable. I always love proof, and thank you so much for sharing. Denise, I want to turn to you. Why is OCD treatable, and how is it treatable?
So, I think that there's two first-line treatments for OCD. One is exposure and response prevention, and there's over, I think, 40 years of research, or maybe over 40 years of research supporting its effectiveness, and so we consider that to be a first-line treatment. Another first-line treatment is medication. So SSRI medication, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and so it's like the Prozac, the Luvox, the Zoloft. And a lot of times people do both, right? So the medicine rarely takes away all of the symptoms, but can take the edge off and make the ERPs more doable. And then sometimes we can supercharge that with acceptance and commitment therapy. So linking it to people's values. So, like why is it worth it? It's painful to live with OCD, and sometimes it's a little difficult to do the treatment, but we opt for pain with a payoff. And so we try to link it to people's values or why it matters to give them that little boost of motivation to do it. And there's scientific data to support that as like a supercharger. We are also paying attention to emerging treatments, as all of us that treat people with OCD are like really excited to further scientific research to support treatments. And so we are also paying attention to ICBT, inference-based cognitive behavioral therapy. And at this point, we're really excited to watch how the research supporting that is growing over time.
Thank you, Denise. As an add-on, what specific characteristics, because we've now touched on it twice, what specific characteristics about obsessive compulsive disorder makes it treatable from a behavioral standpoint?
So what's the mechanism of change?
Why through behaviors can we literally rewire the brain in regards to OCD?
Right. So we're talking about like neuroplasticity, and we're talking about the connections. And so when someone has an obsession, right? So those are the things that are like the thoughts, images, and impulses that make people anxious. Their anxiety goes up, and then what will happen is someone will engage in a compulsion that gives immediate relief. And so there's a brain connection there, right? That like, I am anxious, this is unbearable, do the ritual, and this feels better. But that over the course of time, obviously we know that that's not sustainable, and people end up, it ends up becoming a much bigger problem. And so what we want to help people do is change those connections, like weaken the OCD connection in the brain and strengthen a different connection, which is I can feel anxious, I can be triggered, and that I do not need to do the compulsion in order to eventually feel better. And so one thing that we're trying to do is tease out, what is someone actually afraid of happening? So it might be that if I don't say I love you to my mother, like right before bed perfectly or in just the right way, that something bad is going to happen to her. So we can help sort of identify what the feared outcome is. And then when someone does not engage in the compulsion, they're able to test that out. And many times people can see, wait a second, it did not happen. And so then they can start to see that I felt really anxious, but the feared thing did not happen. I don't need to do the ritual in order to prevent something bad from happening. That's how we can rewire the brain and make different kinds of connections. One little brain hack that I learned about recently that it's something that was related to substance abuse and weight loss, is that when someone is on track and does something like that, and it feels really good, like when you fight OCD, it feels really good. Like there's a feeling inside of you, like it's not just an intellectual, like, wow, I did a great job, period. It's like, that felt good, right? And if you take just like a minute to do like a mindfulness engagement with how that feels inside of you, you get like this little dopamine shower that really solidifies that connection of this feels good, do it again. And so that's like another little thing that I'm teaching the people that I work with. Like when you are fighting OCD and that feels like you feel like such a baddie when you do that, like you beat it, take that minute, feel what it feels like inside of you, mindfully engage with what that's like. You get a little boost for the work that you just did.
So it's so true. And I don't know if you'll agree with me completely, Denise, but I would say too, that at least from my own experience, you don't have to feel good in the moment of fighting it to feel good later. And I know for me, when I was really struggling, I would engage in a value-driven action throughout the day and be literally miserable doing it. I'd be fighting the OCD, the compulsions would be loud, trying to be present, trying to engage, going through the gamut of emotions. And then I'd go to bed that night and there would be this small piece of me that was like, good for you. Like it was ugly. It wasn't pretty. It
Right.
wasn't perfect. But then like I could tune into that moment and like it kind of reinforced, like, do it again. Like
Right.
it's okay and then, yeah, go ahead, Denise.
So that's where we add in like the acceptance and commitment stuff, right? So the ACT. So we really want to view ERP as committed action towards what we care about. Like, what do we care about? We care about, getting back to school. We care about being able to interact with our children. We care about, being able to go, like, go for the job that you want, or I don't know, whatever. Like, whatever it is that you care about, play with your dogs, whatever it is you care about, we want to get back to that. So what's in the way of that? OCD. So doing the ERPs is committed action towards what we value, so that even though it doesn't feel great from an anxiety standpoint, it can feel super empowering from moving towards the life I want, right? OCD is an away move from the life I want, and ERP is a towards move towards the life that I want. And so sometimes that framework really helps people maintain the motivation in the really difficult triggering moments when we can get confused and it gets scary and a little like, what am I doing? Do I really want to do this? Like, what's happening? It helps to maintain clarity and motivation through those really hard moments. So that's why we think it supercharges ERP.
Thank you, Denise. I can definitely second that. And Cash, no, I'm not dead. I actually haven't seen you in a while. I was thinking the same thing, so I'm glad to see you. Cash is always trying to kill me off. Allie, why is OCD so convincing?
Great question. I think OCD is so convincing, because a lot of the times the compulsions that you're engaging in at the surface level aren't necessarily things that other people would maybe second guess. Like, for example, through COVID, with different precautions being taken with germs and all these things. At the surface level, someone washing their hands or doing these behaviors is like, oh yes, that's something that we're actually encouraged to do as a society. So I think that's where it can get really sneaky, as far as when the compulsions are maybe less overt and in fact are things that are maybe like actually have a heightened, like the society like really values them. I think another piece is that when people are engaging in mental compulsions, obviously that is not something that other people can see, and that can become a very cyclical, increasingly demanding experience. And so I think that's where, like, between those two things and avoidance, it's really easy to get caught up in that snowball-like effects, and it affects all these different areas of life and continue to convince you that I am keeping you safe. This is the right thing to do. This is how you live like a good life that aligns with your values. I like to say all the time that like OCD loves to disguise itself as values. And so being able to tease that apart can be really challenging, especially if you're at the thick of it. So.
Well said. I love that. And obviously OCD and compulsions can be so extremely loud, and they tend to attack the things that we love most and the things that we value most, which can be extremely frustrating, and also why they're so convincing. So thank you, Allie, for that insight. We'll keep talking for another 10 or 15 minutes, but I can see that there's a lot of folks in the room, so please don't hesitate to ask questions. We really have an amazing group of individuals here. So if you're not going to ask questions, I am, because there's a lot of good advice to be had here. I was reading Robert's question. Cognitive fusion is often misspelled diffusion, but given what diffusion means, could the okay? It was that's funny. So I want to continue with Allie. So Allie, you're a licensed social worker, but I know that you also have lived experience with OCD, as you said. What was your journey like?
So that's that statistic that's out there of the 14 to 17 years before someone gets connected with evidence-based care. I was right on the money, with 15 years from the time that I can really remember OCD taking a lot of space in my life and when I actually received evidence-based treatment. I think one of the reasons, I mean, there's a plethora of why it was such a lag of me getting connected to the care, is because the content of my OCD was never maybe some of the more well-known content that's out there. It was primarily harm and health. And it became a very challenging situation in which I was going to provider after provider after provider, and OCD was just getting basically gasoline poured on its fire by all these different providers that had, I would imagine, good intentions. And I had no idea that ERP was even out there. Even when I finished grad school, I had never heard the word ERP, which is astounding. And so it actually took, when I finished grad school, is when my OCD had a flare up that had that snowball-like effect to the point that my OCD was at the extreme level. I couldn't leave the house. I was only eating boiled chicken, and I couldn't walk outside. I couldn't watch TV. I couldn't do anything. And was a frequent flyer, to say the least, at the ER. They knew me well. And I kind of had to make a choice at that point, at my rock bottom, of either I'm going to the Mayo Clinic, which would have been the most expensive compulsion of my life thus far, or I'm going to OCD residential treatment. And as far as I'm aware, I definitely made the right choice. And so that's where, once I did the treatment myself and I saw, oh my goodness, I've been living all this life thinking that there was something terribly wrong with me, that I was doing what I was supposed to be doing on paper over and over again and going to providers, and I was somehow missing the mark or getting worse. So there was nothing more empowering for me than doing ERP and being like, I've just had the wrong set of tools. And so once I did have those tools, it just was like a completely different life, and has been thus far. Then I went back to the same ER working for the crisis team as a social worker, and I was like, hey, it's me. I swear I'm not checking in. But yeah, now I pivoted from the crisis world where I was working before into the OCD world, and can't imagine doing anything else. So
Thank you so much for sharing. That's what makes this a community so amazing, is that if you like look at the individuals who find recovery, they usually end up giving back in some way, whether it's advocacy or professionally. And we have some great examples of that here. So I think that's amazing. Matt Bannister at 7:23 p.m. has a question. We'll venture off to question land for a second. It's for John. What are your thoughts for using mindfulness with OCD recovery?
Right now, I'm just thinking about Allie's great story. I know she saw these people with good intentions that didn't, give her ERP, and how there should be a place called the Center for Good Intentions. Like, what a neat idea for a clinic that just doesn't actually help people, but just does the best they can with nothing. That's what's on my mind. Sorry, I got distracted. Mindfulness for OCD for ERP. I think it goes back very much to what Denise was talking about, where what's really important is that you're present for the whole experience, and long enough all the way to the end. Like Ethan, you mentioned, like maybe not even knowing if the exposure was worth it because you were struggling, but sort of staying with it all the way till the end. Because the point of it is that it's based on learning theory, right? So you have to be a witness to what happens when you don't engage in the compulsion. And there's a result to that, right? So either you develop a kind of non-threat association with the trigger, like because nothing bad happened, or you realize that the trigger kind of was something that came and went, or maybe you learned something new about it while you were with it, that it was something you could tolerate, or maybe it wasn't as scary as you thought, or something was different about it. A lot of times when people are approaching ERP, for the first time, they're so desperate to get well that they'll do whatever the ERP therapist says, and they'll just like dive into the exposure, and they'll sort of grit their teeth and clench their fists and literally kind of white knuckle their way through it, but they're not really there for it. So all they're really learning is that they can't do it, or that they can only do it if they're distracting themselves, or they could only do it if up to a certain point, and then they can't do it. So the key is really being in the experience all the way through, and mindfulness is all about that. Mindfulness is about observing the present moment experience exactly the way it is, without judgment, without trying to change it. It's literally just showing up, right? It's reducing that space between what can be observed, which is to say your five senses and what we call mental objects, thoughts, images, things like that, and stories. Our brains tell us stories, and we can watch them sometimes, but sometimes we get like really, really lost in them. And that's when OCD does its worst, when we get really lost in these stories. Mindfulness is the antidote to that. It's not that it keeps us from ever getting involved in stories. It's that it enables us to tell the difference between, okay, this is real life experience happening in the present moment, and this is a story in my head that my brain likes to tell me. So if you can't tell, I like mindfulness. I think there's something to it. I think it extends to pretty much every mental health issue you can think of, because where is the suffering coming from? It's unresolved concern with some story you have about the past, or about the future, or about whether you can handle what's going on without judgment.
Well said. And does anybody else have any thoughts on mindfulness as it relates to OCD recovery?
Yeah, I think that what's so important about mindfulness, along with basically anything, is it's all about the intention. Where I've also seen folks who have taken mindfulness at the very basic skill level without like actually what's the function behind this, what's the goal. I was definitely one of those people that would listen to meditations through the night. I could square breathe for hours and I was doing that with the intention of like, this will prevent me from having a spike of anxiety. If I do this, this is what I'm supposed to do in order to not feel anxious, or to shorten the experience of being anxious. So again, at face value, it's like, oh, she's doing mindfulness, she's meditating. But the fuel behind it was completely compulsive in nature. And that's a very nuanced like subject or experience to explain and to talk through with patients, but it's so key. And it's just like the difference between that white knuckling. You can white knuckle your way easily through a meditation. I've done it many times. And what does it look like to have that willingness and that presence in a way that's not with the intention of getting rid of anxiety? So that's something that I always like to highlight, because I great compulsive mindfulness person.
As any thoughts?
Yeah, I think mindfulness was something that was really missing from my recovery for a long time. And that was one of the keys to me getting to be where I am now. In fact, I mean, I would say it wasn't really introduced to me in such a concrete way until I did DBT in the end of my college experience into a couple years after college. And mindfulness is very key in dialectical behavioral therapy as well, which is kind of like that subset of CBT. And because it was so concretely like step by step, that really was really helpful for me as someone who like, I need the instructions. I need to know how to do it step by step. Just, I appreciate the knowing exactly what to do, when to do it kind of thing. And having those homework assignments for mindfulness was really helpful. But one thing that actually really helped was like I also have panic disorder, and it really helped with my panic attacks also, because I had been doing for so long, had been like, again, like that thinking I was being mindful by being like, oh, like I'm really anxious right now. I'm really anxious right now. But I was so anxious about being anxious that it was making my anxiety spike, and I hadn't realized that. And then I had been doing the opposite of what I was supposed to be doing, which is like anti-mindfulness, where I would kind of say, this isn't OCD, this isn't panic, this isn't this. Like, I'm actually fine right now. I'm totally fine. I'm so fine. And the more I did that, the worse the anxiety got. And I wasn't able to stop the cycle until I was able to be mindful with the anxiety and sit with the anxiety and be like, okay, I'm anxious right now. And there's a difference between saying, oh my God, I'm anxious right now, and okay, I'm anxious right now. There's like that intent is such a key factor. And just like with OCD, like, oh my God, OCD strikes again, versus, oh, okay, this is an OCD thought, or maybe this is an OCD thought. That's also been a game changer. It's like the maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Cool, let's move on.
I see a lot of people when they're starting to engage in mindfulness activities and understand mindfulness, do mindfulness, but like kind of what you're talking about is like with judgment though, right? Like I'm not being mindful enough. If I was more mindful, I'd get this thought to go away. And the sort of key ingredient in making mindfulness work and making it enhance.
Oh, sorry.
I'm late at work, it's house cleaning. The key ingredient to allowing mindfulness to really enhance the ERP is to do it with judgment and self-compassion. It's the, oh, look at that, there's anxiety. Oh, look at that, there's my thought. Oh, look at that, okay, this is me struggling with it, and this is resistance to it being there. All with the tone of, I'm going to be here with myself, watching this thing happen all the way through, and I can handle this. Or maybe I can't handle this, but I'm having thoughts about not handling this. So that's okay also, because those are the types of thoughts I have. And the mindfulness, like, it's not effective with judgment, with self-criticism. That's like the anti-mindfulness, but that's like very hard to let go of if it's become a part of your conditioning over time.
Right.
Denise, I saw you raise your hand.
Yeah, I was just going to underscore something that I guess what everybody said, I'm adding on to. I agree with and adding on to, but what we say to ourselves matters. But I think a lot of times people with OCD or anxious people with anxiety feels like they're on roller skates and they're just like roller skating all around and everything is so fast. And you know, it's like they have no idea. We have no idea like what is driving it or what's going on. And I think the mindfulness is, you know, getting more comfortable being uncomfortable. It's like observing, just so that you know the way your brain works, and it slows things down and it allows you to create some space. And yes, like the judgment is just adding an extra layer on top of things. And so that's a layer that we actually have a lot of influence over, right? And so it's like, slow it down. I feel like we go around like shaking up a snow globe, and like mindfulness helps you to just put the snow globe down, the snow settles, and then you get some clarity. And it's with that clarity that you can actually maneuver. But when you are on roller skates and you're going all over the place, like you're really just reactive. You're just roller skating from thing to thing in a way. And it's just like, that's not a workable place, right? And so I just think it just quiets things down, helps us get some clarity. And it's from that more clear space, right, that we're able to make real decisions.
Beautifully said. Thanks, everyone. ISA stage at 7:24 p.m. We'll stick with Denise. From an ACT perspective, what advice or treatment approach would you give to a patient whose OCD is related to something real and even probable? like something that is not magical or absurd?
Well, I think it's going to be about being, I like to help people get to the point of choice, right? And I think OCD really takes choice away. And so what is it, even if it's like, I just had a new baby and I'm afraid something's going to happen to my baby. When women have babies, like, or, new parents are like, I have this tiny little human being I'm supposed to keep alive. I mean, almost anything could happen. That's not improbable. I mean, it's possible, but it's not probable. But it's like, you can't tell a new mom or dad, like, there's zero going to happen to this child. And so what you really want to do is like, think about, you don't really want OCD to be taking away the joy. You don't want OCD to be taking away your choices about how you sort of navigate new parenthood, right? So it's not about trying to get someone to like get to the point where there's certainty that nothing will happen. It's like, I value getting more comfortable with uncertainty. So this drive to get certainty does not hijack my life. So you really need to be making sure that you're valuing the thing that unhooks you from OCD or prevents OCD from like taking over everything. Does that make sense?
Well
Right.
said.
So what are we valuing? It's going to be choice, freedom, getting more comfortable, being uncomfortable, like things like that allow you to get back to your life the way that you want it to be.
Ez, what are your thoughts?
I think that's a huge piece of how I've been able to motivate myself is instead of being reactive to being proactive and thinking. It was also something that I really wasn't able to do for a long time. And it was kind of like, for me, a shift in my recovery was, or like knowing that I was further along my recovery was knowing that I was able to start working from a future proactive response rather than a reactive response. Because for years, I think I was really much of my recovery was really just like, let's get through this day. And then at some points it was like, let's get through this hour. And it was so much so just getting through it. And like, I just need to just get through this hour and then I'm going to take 1 hour at a time. My grandma literally used to say 1 day at a time, that's all you can do. I was 1 hour at a time, that's all you can do. And then at a certain point, I think I'd say this was about a year ago or 2 years ago. So it was years after I had started treatment. I thought to myself, wait, like I think someone had asked me like, well, where did you see yourself in like when you were a kid? And I was like, I never thought about what the future would look like because I was just trying to get through the next hour. And now I'm an adult and I'm here and oops, I didn't think I'd get this far. It's literally that like, there's that meme with SpongeBob's arch nemesis Plankton being like, I don't know, I never thought I'd get this far. That's how I feel constantly. Where I just wasn't proactive because I had no ability to be. I really didn't have the space in my brain for anything more than get through the hour. And now that I'm at this point that I am much more able to look into what do I want from life, that has felt like a really beautiful turning point for me.
Right. So in the beginning, it might be really hard to envision something bigger than just the moment. Like I remember those days in my life, it was like literally I'd set my alarm for an hour and be like, okay, set it for the next hour. But in those moments, like thinking about acceptance and commitment therapy, it's really, we're trying to help people like in those moments, it could be valuing willingness. Like I value the willingness to be in this moment and to stay on the treatment plan, or flexibility. I value developing the capacity to be flexible, to think about this outside of just an OCD paradigm, or curiosity. Like I really value being curious about what my experience is in this moment, right? As a way to help me get a better sense of what's going on and sort of feed that into the treatment. So it doesn't have to be like, well, I want to get myself back to school to get my, LICSW to be able to treat people with OCD. Like at some point, it just be like, I value just staying on this path because I do believe this is the path that's going to move me forward out of this. I just value using my treatment skills as much as I possibly can, whatever. So.
Oh, I 100% agree. I think that's honestly something that was almost missing from my treatment for many years, was that ability to find values even in the midst of those 1 hour at a time.
Right.
And I think that did slow my recovery down, was because I wasn't able to think self-compassionately and think about those values, because that wasn't addressed. And I really do think that that makes all the difference for many people, including myself.
Right. And one
Right, Allie.
last thing, I don't want to hijack, but a lot of people I work with really do struggle with the small steps. It's like, people with perfection will be like, yeah, I did that, but what about this? This isn't done. And so also helping people sort of value just those small steps as important in the journey to get them where they need to go as well.
Go ahead, Allie.
Yeah, I think where the worst case scenario is, within the realm of possibilities, I think that's exactly when we start to see values disguised as OCD, or OCD disguised as values in those situations. I cannot tell you how many people, myself included, who, for example, have had their OCD content around health, and they've had lived experiences with medical trauma as a child, or a lot of involvement in the medical system. That was the case for me. And I managed that by advocating for myself, or my parents advocating for me. And it really honed in on this value of like advocating for myself, protecting myself, valuing my health. So when I was going through OCD treatment, that was a very tough situation to tease apart. Like, yes, that is still important to me. I cannot tell you how many times that I was like, so am I just supposed to sit here and die? And it's like, no, Allie. But like, that's how it felt, right? Because this is how I've gone this far. And we still have to sit with the possibility, and it is there. I just posted a video about how I recently, in the last couple of months, found out I had a brain aneurysm, and I am so glad that this did not happen while I was in OCD treatment, because that would have been way off the SUD scale. But it was a perfect moment to hone in on, yeah, this was one of my worst case scenarios, and the goal was never to guarantee that wasn't going to happen, right? But rather that it happened and I was able to be there present through it. Whereas in the peak of OCD, I would have been like, I could have avoided this. I need to, do all these things right away. But that's tough, especially when you've had those lived experiences of like, oh my goodness, if I wouldn't have taken the initiative or been more, on top of it, what would have happened in these lived experiences? But then also you have to look at the cost, right? And that's ultimately what pushed me through treatment, was like, okay, your entire life is revolved around OCD compulsions with your health, and it's actually taking you away from all these values. Sure, I mean, in this weird way, eating boiled chicken and being agoraphobic, not great for your health. So it's actually going against my values in the long term, but I really had to hone in on all the other things like connection and purpose, be able to pull me through and be like, yep, I value these things so much that I'm willing to take a risk when it comes to this type of content that my OCD is latched onto. So
I have so many thoughts on this subject, but before I do, because then I'm going to get on to other questions. I don't know, John, if you had any thoughts as well. You always have thoughts. I like your thoughts.
Thanks. I like your thoughts too, Ethan. You wear them well. I think that I think with values that's really challenging when working with people whose OCD is on the more severe end of things, is that OCD is such a thief that they may have spent we were just talking about, kind of making it hour to hour. Like sometimes it's difficult for a person to see what their North Star is even supposed to be, to have any sense of what their values are even supposed to be, to make any sense of who they even are. I think we take for granted that, like, of course, everybody values this, or everybody has some values. It's true that deep down everybody has values and most people can identify them, but it's also true that many people can't, because they haven't. Part of where we get our values is from our experience of life on Earth and from our jobs and our relationships and things like that. Well, if you haven't been working and you haven't been engaging in healthy relationships, that's going to interfere in the development of those values. It's not that you don't have them, but you might not be able to see them or identify them. So part of the work is saying, okay, so why is it worth it to do this exposure therapy? What's the value trying to get to? That's part of it. But then the other part of the work is kind of like, really establishing a relationship in the therapy, right? A therapeutic relationship, old-fashioned, non-evidence-based therapeutic relationship. Like, I'm going to help you with this. This is based on trust. I know something you don't about OCD, but you know something I don't, which is what it's like to be you. And we're going to use this magic here to try to find some way of getting at something that makes it worth it for you to fight for yourself to get well. Because I'm coming in already with a bias. I'm your advocate. I want you to get well. You're not always sure you're worth it. So we have to fight against that until we kind of get you to the place where you're sure you're worth it. Now you just need to know how to get there. Well
said, John. I know I'll weigh in. I think that ACT is incredible. I can resonate with Ez and Ali, and it really changed my perception of my thinking and my thoughts and my relationship to my thoughts in a way that then I could make sense out of ERP and really utilize that as a treatment. I think the whole thing, especially with mindfulness, is like this whole process is deconstructing. It's so interesting because OCD completely overcomplicates everything that we do until you have this massive 3,000 foot story pile of crap that we then have to then knock down and bring back to basics, right? And the basics are simply this: do we have to prepare for every fear, scenario, or worry? Can we handle whatever it is when it comes up in that moment and trust that we can? Are we willing to let go of what we think is control when really we have so little control over so much? And this crazy paradox is when you let go of that control, you feel more in control because suddenly it doesn't matter what happens moving forward. You'll deal with it, right? So I think it's very interesting that, you know, it's about peeling of the layers and coming back to basics and then learning how to just live the simplest, most mindful life. And of course, it's very difficult to live in that all the time. But the goal is to try as much as possible to live in a mindful state where you can embrace the discomfort of wherever your thoughts take you and be willing to accept that you'll be able to handle it in that moment. One thing, that Isostasia, that you mentioned that I want to raise attention to is I think it's easy for individuals whose OCD symptomatology and subtypes play in that probable world. It's easy to use that to defend OCD and to say, well, like, yeah, but, you know, I know that my thing is COVID or something. You know, individuals whose OCD is more magical thinking, theirs is just as real. And it feels just as irresponsible and negligent to not compulse as mine's health too. So I thought I was going to die if I didn't do certain things. And if I didn't do them, it felt negligent and irresponsible. I think that we have to look at all of it as OCD regardless and try not to defend it from a perspective of, well, this is a real thing, this could happen, or this isn't a real thing, this could happen. It's real to everyone, regardless of what we're all experiencing. And I think it's important to really relinquish this control and be willing to experience the experience until it comes and feel like you can handle it in that moment. Denise, I know you have something to add.
No, I agree with everything you said. I mean, I think sometimes because people like we're attaching meaning to things, and I think it's really about when it gets that confusing, right? Sometimes we just have to even stop paying attention to the content of what the OCD is and think more about, I think everybody has a way that OCD feels inside of them. And I think the content can get tricky. Like, is this OCD or not? Is whatever. And what I say is like, let's not pay attention to the words or the content. Let's just pay attention to how it feels in you, which is why we need mindfulness. We're drawing upon the mindfulness of like, how is it feeling inside of you? Does that feel like what OCD feels like inside of you? Yes. Okay. Then we know what to do, right? It's so confusing. And so we're looking for adding in like the values can, help clarify, or mindfulness helps us quiet things down and get clarity. That's why we need some of these extra things to just help us make sense of it. And I also want to underscore two things John said. Therapeutic relationship, the most important therapeutic intervention with people with OCD, because of what John said. You have to, the person's not going to do this if they don't trust you. And one of the mantras I have with people that I work with that are like really feeling confused is like, I'm like, trust us, just trust us, over and over and over. Like in those moments, just trust us. And so therapeutic relationships, so important. Building in trust, so important in of yourself, but if not, trust us. So those are just a couple of things that were on my mind after the last few comments.
That's the first big exposure, isn't it? Right? Mm-hmm. When you ask somebody to trust you, that's the first thing they have to do. And they walk in the door, they go right to the top of the hierarchy, and they have to make a decision. Are you going to trust this person with my life? And
right.
It's a sacred thing. It should be taken seriously.
Right. And when we're training people, a lot of times people like ERP therapists or OCD therapists newly are like, let's get to the ERPs. I'm like, first order of business is establishing therapeutic relationship. Or when I'm working with kids and parents are like, let's go. I'm like, the first thing we need to do is get your kids to like and trust me, or they will do nothing. Right. So we want to get to it, but there are certain things we have to have in place that create an environment in which we can do this work.
And I think it's also, and I don't know Ali and Ez's thoughts, I think I like this being a natural conversation. I think it's important in my own experience after 17 years, by the time I found somebody that did the correct treatment and they asked me to trust them, I was like, no, I don't trust you because 10 other therapists told me to trust them. And I did, and I always think about OCD therapy as falling in love. If you had a bad breakup, it's like, you're never going to find love again if you're not willing to try again. And it's like, I know it can be painful and I know it can be exhausting, but I mean, if you're in that situation, we talk to so many individuals that have seen ERP that don't feel like it worked in the right way or didn't get a good therapist or whatever. Like, I'm not trying again. Well, you're giving up on yourself too. It's like, if you want to reach that level of wellness and reach that level that Ez is at and Ali's at, not saying we don't suffer because we do struggle, but moving to that point that you have to try again. You have to be willing to take that risk in order to get that reward. And I think that's important to lay out.
Right. And you got to earn someone's trust. I would never say trust us like right off the bat. It's like, that is what you can cash in on a really good relationship, is in those really, really, really hard choice points. You can pull on that, but that is hard fought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think especially knowing that we're working with a population, like you said, Ethan, who have been more likely than not seen a lot of providers who, haven't been able to treat them effectively or given them information or tools that weren't helpful. But also, I think just OCD in and of itself, a lot of the times the experience that a patient comes in with is like, I don't even understand what's happening with me. I don't understand what's happening with my brain, why this is happening, why this content bothers me. And they've typically spent a lot of time, trying to just figure it out and understand themselves, and then maybe trying to explain and be understood by other people with a wide spectrum of responses that they could have gotten, right? Some being very negative. So I think that piece of like your patients knowing that they're understood is so therapeutic in and of itself, of like, I hear you, I understand, I'm understanding the process. This doesn't surprise me. I'm not shocked. I might not agree with the content. I might not understand as far as like, yes, this is going to happen, but I understand your experience and what's going on. And that is just such a huge relief for patients, especially who have tried over and over again to try to explain what's been going on with them.
I will say that one of the pieces of trust that I'm most thankful for was that I think it took me a long time to trust my therapist. I am very lucky in some ways that I was diagnosed as a kid, because the people that I trusted most were my parents at that point. And my parents did everything they could and more just to make sure that I had a chance and that I could get better. And I remember them like they would literally help me through the ERP that we would do at home, where there were like I would tap the doorways in a certain pattern before going through them. And I remember my parents literally like helping me walk through a doorway without tapping. And I remember I have like a very vivid memory of like being in my parents' bedroom and we were going through a doorway because that was one of the easier doorways for me. And I was so afraid to go through it without tapping. And they were like, come on, we're right here. We're right here with you, right behind you. And I was almost in tears, and they literally walked me through the doorway. And I remember I just had to trust them. Same with medication. I remember having a conversation with them where I was very upset. And I said, I don't want to take medication. It's going to change who I am. And they said, you have to understand, this is not changing who you are. This is helping you be the person that we know you are, and helping you kind of take charge of your life again. And I remember still being like, oh no, but like, I who am I without all of these things? Like I can't risk it. And I saw medication at that time at 12 years old so much as this is going to change my body chemistry, my biochemistry, and I am no longer me. And now I being on medication for longer than I've been off medication at this point in my life, I can say without medication, I don't know if I'd be where I am in my recovery. That it is immensely, for me, it's really made a difference. That, and then all the psychotherapy, ERP that I've been through, And again, with my parents by my side, and my sister, it's been so invaluable to have that family support.
Yeah, I agree. I'm going to go on to some other questions, but thank you all for sharing. I think the last thing I'll say on trust is that if anything in this moment, I think it's so easy to look at somebody else talking that may be in maintenance or in recovery and go, well, yeah, but that's you. You know, I know I did. I know I sat there while everybody else was talking about how well they've gotten. And I was like, yeah, but you don't have my OCD. You're not like me. I'm that. And I think the biggest thing is like, trust us, trust individuals that you're seeing on live streams or that you're talking to that are in recovery, that are living, you know, beautiful, full lives and saying to you that this treatment works. You just have to put in the work and the effort. I know it's difficult to access and find, and we're working so hard at the IOCDF to make it accessible. But I think the first line of trust is if you don't trust anyone else, trust Ali, trust Ez, trust myself, trust those of us that have been through it and saying it does work. It does work. For the panel, Phyllis Taylor at 7:31 p.m. I've always been the one with OCD, but now that my older relative has dementia, she exhibits some very OCD-like behavior. What is the connection between OCD and working memory? John, I think, reads more than anyone else on the panel. He at least writes more than anyone else on the panel. So I'm going to turn this over to John, who's going to say, I'm going to turn it over to Denise. But go ahead, John.
It's a bit out of my scope. I mean, I think that's a medical question. I could say that I have met people in our residential program who came in with an OCD diagnosis or had some OCD-like symptoms, and it was of the checking variety, and they're quite anxious because, you know, they kept checking and could not kind of resolve their concerns. It might be something like checking to make sure that an alarm was set for the morning or something like, you know, something small. And so it would look a lot like OCD, but then after doing some neurocognitive testing, we might discover this person had some mild cognitive deficits. They literally just weren't remembering what they were doing, or the signal that something had been done wasn't being fired off. There's some evidence to suggest that some component of OCD is tied to memory in that way, that like when you do something, it's supposed to feel like you've done something, right? When you lock a door, you walk away, there's this feeling that a task has been completed. And then one of the things I read about OCD once that kind of stuck with me was this idea that maybe for some people with OCD, whatever neurons responsible for firing off to tell you that you did something isn't firing off. So you can remember doing it, you can picture doing it, you know that you did it, but it doesn't feel like you did it. So you have to go back and add rituals and behaviors to kind of lock it in, to kind of force yourself to really feel like the task was completed. So I don't know how much that has to do directly with working memory, but they're probably related concepts that someone's struggling with dementia and they're having trouble retaining short-term memories. I could see how that would cause someone both to feel the need to, you know, repeat actions and repeat things, repeat questions, but also to be quite anxious and irritable about it, you know, because they're doing the best they can, and people around them start to treat them like, you know, you should be able to do better. So it's very frustrating, very important to get, you know, appropriate medical attention and appropriate evaluations when those things are in play.
Right. So yeah, so there's some data where it's not clear what the exact relationship is on OCD and working memory. And yeah, I've been referred people for pretty severe OCD and I just didn't feel right. And I sent them to a neurologist and it was dementia. So early dementia, and one person who had pretty aggressive dementia and died a few months later. So I think that it could be something about the way in which they're managing forgetfulness as they're progressing through the disease. It can also be a symptom of the disease. You know, sometimes people with dementia just have repetitive behaviors that have nothing to do with relieving anxiety. It's just part of how their dementia has progressed. So at that point, yeah, it's like really important just to, you know, get a diagnosis. But with someone who has OCD, if they're in a dementia related process, I mean, I think you have to proceed with caution about ERP. They, you know, because someone really needs to understand why you just wouldn't like block the ritual. Like they'd really have to understand what they were doing and why. So at that point, it would probably be about harm reduction and medication at that point, not necessarily an ERP treatment, but proceed with caution.
Thank you for that. Question at 7:45 is a great question. I'm going to throw this to Ali. How to know when it's time to look for inpatient treatment? What are the signs?
Yeah, I think that some of the things that I talk through with patients with at least our IOP, and I used to talk through this with them, people who were considering going to residential, we really want to look at a couple things. The biggest thing being how this is impairing all the different realms of life. Because OCD just has this tendency to have that cyclical nature that has that snowballing effect. A lot of the times when people are seeking a higher level of care, it's because it's not this isolated experience anymore. Now it's impacting their work or school or their relationships or their ability to do any of the things that they enjoy and socialize. And so when someone's at the point that their symptoms have impacted all those different areas of life, I would say that's a fair time to look into a higher level of care. They can continue with outpatient. I think the problem is that it's going to be a slower process. And they might just need more support. And I think that's a nice thing about ERP is that it is a skill that you're learning. I always say that some of the best ERP therapists work themselves out of a job. And my goal is to give people those skills. And so a higher level of care can be a way to really hone in on those skills repetitively with support. Some of the other things that come to mind that is more nuanced is like people that maybe, they're still working and they are white knuckling through every single day. They're not there. They're not present. Maybe they're engaging in compulsions the whole day. So at face value, it's like, I'm there, but at what cost? So that's where we kind of navigate. Okay. And if you were to stay at the outpatient level, what do you think that could look like versus like, what would you think about the trade-off of taking, time off work or taking a pause on, your normal life? Because what's your quality of life right now? And is this sustainable rather than pursuing a higher level of care? So.
Denise, John, Ez?
Yeah, I mean, I think Allie sort of covered it, but I was just thinking about what were the cases like that I've recently referred. And a lot of times contamination can get really out of hand for people. Sometimes people come to me with pretty bad contamination and it's already really bad. And it's hard to proceed with ERP because, people are maintaining a clean and dirty world and you try to cross over and then it's like flooding at that point. So sometimes people I've sent people to residential just as a way to get a little bit of a distance from it, to like learn the skills and get ready. And then you can introduce it in a slower way. Or people that were doing good ERP, but needed a higher dose of ERP that I could give them. Like those are the kinds of things that I like, just kids who can't get to school because of their OCD. Those are like, we really want a high dose pretty quickly to get things under better control and then come back out and then we can pace it.
I'm going to
just add a data point that I think is important for people to understand that inpatient and residential are not the exact same thing. And so we often conflate the terms when we're talking about residential. We might call it inpatient. So residential is, where you're getting a very high level of treatment and you're living at the place that's providing that treatment, usually in a hospital setting, but it's typically an unlocked setting. And there's certain, parameters there in terms of, sign outs and kind of work you do, what kind of therapy you get. Whereas inpatient is typically for short-term stabilization in a locked setting. So you would go to inpatient if you're really concerned for your safety, if you're having suicidal thoughts, if you're not able to feed yourself or take care of your basic ADLs, that might be a reason to go to inpatient, where they might work very quickly and very intensely to try to stabilize you with medication and intensive treatment, not necessarily ERP. You're unlikely to get ERP in that setting and probably wouldn't be good for you in that short term. But then from there, you might go to a residential setting if that's what you need.
Yeah.
John, I'm going to toss something out. Did you have something to add?
I think the only piece is just I want to echo the previously stated how when it's impacting areas of life like daily functioning, it's just, I think that's really like the more areas it's impacting, the harder it's going to be for you to get that help in other ways. And I know for me, while I never had to go into a residential program, the way that my doctor and I knew I needed a partial hospitalization program years ago was because it was impacting my ability to work and to be present in work. And then also my ability to just feel stable even at outside of work, and just enjoying life was not easy. But it was really because of the OCD that it had gotten so bad. And at that point, it was at least manageable enough that I wasn't doing severe compulsions at home, but it was bad enough that it was impacting my life in pretty much every domain.
Thank you, Ez, for sharing that. I had a funny thought, which is my wife, Katie, has her master's and just got her doctorate. And I was like, oh, I went inpatient and I did residential. It's like the same thing almost. Not quite as good looking on a resume, but even so, you know, it's something I talk about. I'm going to toss something out to John, because this isn't something I've really talked. This might be the first time I'm voicing this, but I think this is an important topic. And since you run a residential program, I think it's worth touching on.
I've run around in a residential program. It's
Yes.
not the same thing.
You're actually in a residential program as we speak.
Running around it.
Yeah. So I think there is a belief, most of the time, perhaps if you're not with a therapist, but especially around parents of adult children and caregivers and things like this, that if your loved one or someone has severe OCD and is not functioning, that the best place for that individual needs to be residential, the highest level of care. But oftentimes that individual isn't ready to engage in residential care because they don't fit the milieu and there's certain things that they have to do. And I think we should speak a little bit to that, because I think there's this automatic correlation of, oh, severe OCD, they need residential. And it's like, but oftentimes that backfires. And I would love to see us be more proactive around that. So John, start. I can see Denise has some thoughts as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's definitely from the perspective of working in a residential, it's a significant challenge when somebody comes here and it's because they've been heavily pressured by parents or treatment providers who, of course, have the best of intentions, but the buy-in isn't there. So there's this person here and they're being expected to do all this work, but they don't want to be here and they don't trust the process. And we were just talking about trusting in your therapist. You're meeting a whole new team of therapists, like all at once, multiple kinds of therapies. So it can be really, really challenging when someone's coming here and they're not really coming here on their own. They're not ready. What we need is a system that provides multiple levels of care that you can move up and down more gracefully, from outpatient to IOP to PHP to residential, back down to PHP, IOP, and move up and down that scale, however is appropriate for your needs, but also for who and how you are. I think a lot of people get scared when they're working with somebody who's so impaired and they feel like they can't help. Then I think you kind of alluded to this, Ethan. It's like, well, we'll just send them to residential, right? You just sort of send them and then they go. But that's a whole process for that human being that can be really intense and really traumatic and not necessarily work out for them if that's not, where they want to be, or, I guess what I'm trying to say is, the individual has to have the say in their treatment, and this needs to be a process of collaboration that is very well thought out. And maybe it'll get to the place where someone's willing to say, okay, I'm going to leave my home, I'm going to leave my family, I'm going to leave the certain comforts, the small comforts that I still have, my cat or whatever it might be, and I'm going to go into this strange place and take the leap, and hopefully they can help me. And of course, our goal in residential is to keep you here for the smallest amount of time necessary for you to be able to go back home, right? And maybe you'll be in treatment during the day, but then you'll be sleeping at home. That would be what a PHP or an adult day hospital might look like. Yeah, I mean, I can hear from what you're describing, Ethan, that it sounds like maybe in your experience that there have been situations where you felt kind of like you're expected to just sort of go over here and get this done. You're too much work for us or something like that. And I think that's an unfortunate dynamic that comes up. And I think it comes up in part because sometimes residentials overpromise how easy, just come here and we'll fix you. And sometimes lower levels of care overpromise, just go there and they'll fix you. Or I think it's a systemic issue.
And just to clarify before Denise weighs in, I wasn't necessarily speaking from a provider perspective, even a parental perspective or adult child or caretaker perspective, the sort of overarching belief that is, if you're that impaired that you're completely unable to function, you need to be in residential. That's all I was.
Yeah, I'll just add that that's sometimes true and sometimes not. That it really depends on the individual. I wouldn't assume that just because somebody's OCD is taking up 24 hours a day that they're going to necessarily thrive in a residential environment. Residential environment is like a full-time job. It's 30 to 40 hours a week of therapy where you're going to groups and you're doing individual therapy and you're doing this work. It's a miracle what it is, but it's a lot of work. It's not a given that somebody who can't take care of themselves is going to thrive in a residential environment.
Right. I work with many people that are very impaired, and I never start with residential. Like, that's just not, we want to do like the least restrictive possible. And I think it's hard to find an OCD therapist. So let's just say that. But if you do have options, I think you would want to try to find an OCD therapist that has some flexibility in the way that they deliver their care. So, prior to COVID, I did home base. That was my thing. But if I have people that are struggling with, greater symptomatology, I will see them more. I will see them longer. I'll do daily check-ins. Like, I can't, my modus operandi is really like whatever this person needs at this particular time. It does then get, though, to a point where there are times when I am referring people to residential care, but it is a collaboration, it is a communication. And when I'm working with people that are reluctant to go, it's generally that there's a fear. It's based in fear. And so to do whatever we can do to, demystify what that would be like and sort of alleviate some of those fears. And if it's not really fear, it's more unwillingness, then we would work with, whomever, like the family system, whatever that system is, as a way to sort of mark out how do you know it's time to go to residential? What would you like to try beforehand? Like, what are the markers that are going to help us make this decision? And if you can set those markers objectively with the person who's like struggling, then it's more of like an up and up conversation that feels collaborative and focused on objective criteria than people feeling pressured. And also, like John was saying, it's helped to run the OCDI for 10 years. And one of my jobs was to receive the new person. And no one really wanted to be there, but they did have to be willing to be there. And, I think there's generally criteria, John can comment on this, where, programs like residential programs will not take people that are not willing to be there. That's one of like the criteria that people need to meet. That does not mean they want to or they're excited about it. It just means that they're willing to. But I work with many, many people that are very, very impaired. I mean, in the trenches is my specialty, and I really am never starting with residential.
Yeah, it's a safety concern. I mean, you can't have a voluntary unlocked program full of people who don't want to be there, because then you can't account for their safety.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things I'm really passionate about is the work working with parents, especially parents of young adults who have high acuity, OCD, or other things, or teens. And I've had so many conversations with parents who I've said, I know that if you could, do anything in the world and it would drag them over the finish line, I know you would do it, and it would be doing them no favors. Like, they need to choose this for themselves. And I know that's like a devastating experience to want so badly for your child to get treatment and, get better. And to sit with that of like, yeah. And right now we need to focus on other things. We need to focus at where they are at, not where you want them to be, and meet them there and figure out the next step. And that's a tough place. I can imagine what that looks like to be like, I know that there's this effective treatment and you're not ready. But I've also seen the consequences of a patient maybe being, going through treatment without that motivation, without that, drive to want it. And it's not sustainable in recovery. So,
Allie, what are some great ways to motivate young teens, kids?
Great question. I think that's where the ACT is so helpful. I think the first piece, the therapeutic relationship, I think kids have or teens or young adults have had all kinds of experiences or maybe perceptions of what it looks like to do therapy, right? So having that therapeutic relationship and them getting the idea of like, okay, maybe this is someone that I can be real and authentic with, and then taking it from there and really being intentional about weaving in their interests, weaving in their goals, not necessarily society's goals or parents' goals, but what they're interested in, wants, and would be excited about doing, and figuring out how we can set up exposure work around those things. I think that's another thing with like inhibitory learning, of like taking almost like a gamified version of OCD or of ERP, of like, okay, let's make this like a game of like taking on OCD as like the rival. I find that really effective with younger folks too. So that's some of the things that I've seen be effective.
Go ahead, Denise.
He's like, she always has something to say, which is
No.
which is true. I mean, I always do have something to say, but I think that well, when I work with kids or teens, I'm always working with parents, always, or I won't take the case. But that doesn't necessarily mean I'm doing that at the same time. When I tell the kids, like, I'm going to teach your parents stuff too. Like, they kind of like that. When I help kids identify what the cost is, like, what do you want back? What is this taking from you? That's helpful. It's different than values. You do oftentimes have to do a value clarification exercise because sometimes kids don't even know what values are. And then I also just try to link it to something they've already been successful at, like, playing sports. If you've had a sports injury and you really care about soccer, find analogies, physical therapy. Have you ever done that? Yeah, I did that. Was it hard? Yeah, I was doing. Why'd you do it? Because I wanted to get back in the field. I'm like, okay, can we use that example where you've already done this very thing and just apply it to OCD? So analogies, your parents are going to be learning stuff too. Therapeutic relationship, flexible with the appointments. Like, I'm not making, kids sit, especially if they have like ADHD or something, for like 45 minutes, 50 minutes, an hour. Like, I'm super flexible about that. Like, and also giving them a say, like, where do you want to start? How do you want to do it? What are some of your ideas here? Really, like, helping them have some autonomy in the treatment. Those are things that are helpful.
As what was your experience? I mean,
yeah, no, I agree 100% with all of that. I mean, although I don't treat OCD in schools, I work with kids every day, and have been for several years. But right now, I work with kindergarten through 8th grade, so I have a really nice range of kids, and I found it really motivating for them when they know that I am there to listen first and foremost. Like, I think a lot of times the kids expect me to talk at them, and when they're being listened to, that sometimes can be a game changer. Kids who see that I'm genuinely interested in what they have to say, so being genuinely interested in them and their interests, and also being genuinely interested in what success looks like for them. So whether that's in a school setting or out of a school setting, I think, like what was previously said, I think, how does someone define success? And I even talk about that when I work with students, like with them. I just say, what is something that, how would we know that you might have met your goal, kind of thing, and helping them set their goals, breaking those goals down into small steps, but sort of not doing it in a condescending way as much as doing we're doing this not because I don't think you can do it, but because I want you to see that you can do it. So framing things that way too. I think sometimes I see adults being kind of condescending, and they don't mean to be, but there's that fine line between comforting and condescending. And so sort of just making sure you're on the right side of that. And the last piece I would say is being honest, in the sense that, like, I think especially with older students, I try not to sugarcoat. I mean, even with younger, I think with some of the things that students deal with, I don't want to act like, oh, this is going to get better right away. In fact, I sometimes say to students, yeah, it sounds like this has been tough, and I can't promise you that things are going to get better right away, but I'm here for you, and I'm here every step of the way. And students appreciate that I'm not trying to say, like, we're going to get better in 3 counseling sessions. But they're more willing to listen to, I don't know how long this will take, but we're here together.
Can I say one more thing? I just think when working, one other thing is when I'm working with kids, one of the things I often have to do is just resist getting on the parent change agenda. Like, you sent your child to me, like, let me do my thing. But a lot of times there's a lot of anxiety coming from parents, and it pushes things or pressures things. And I think withstanding that to create the space, like as is saying, like, space to think and tell me about it and plan and say what you want, like, that is also a big relationship builder. And it's also kind of hard. Like, and I'm like, if it's hard for me to hold that space against this, like, it must be really hard for them to hold the space. And so that's linked to, like, no, I'm going to talk to your parents too. Like, I think everybody needs to learn skills here, that's been helpful.
Well, yeah, parents have to learn to live with the discomfort as much as the patients do, for sure. I know mine did. And I love all the comments, by the way. Y'all are incredible. The support, so many great comments, so many great thoughts and feelings. And I saw some beautiful statements. I won't call out the name because I don't know, they're new, but I just read a comment. I just came across this on my dad's phone. I'm surprised everybody is saying stuff that I feel, which, I love hearing that. You're definitely not alone in this, and laughter and all the good stuff. As long as we're on kids, obviously, under 18, parents have some leverage. Adult children can also be challenging, especially if there are caretakers. John, I'll turn it to you. In terms of, parents that are frustrated and exhausted trying to help their adult children get help in a meaningful way, adult children just not willing to do it, not interested, don't want to hear it. What advice can you give?
First, give yourself some compassion, right? You've done the best you can, and maybe you've made mistakes. Maybe you didn't know how to respond to your child's OCD, but now your child's an adult, and the roles have changed, or they're meant to change, right? So everybody goes through transitions in life, like the children go through these transitions, and I think we sometimes forget that parents are also meant to go through certain transitions. Not that you have to or that you're supposed to, but there's sort of this prediction, right? Like when my child turns a certain age, they might go to college or they may live outside of the house, and then my role in life is going to change. I'm no longer going to be the primary caregiver. I'm going to be any sort of partial caregiver, but partial. I'm going to start a new business or reinvest in my relationships. So it's a developmental phase that adults go through when their children go from being children to adults that gets missed. And in the same way that we saw developmental phases get kind of robbed from a generation of kids through the pandemic, this also happens with adults. And so it takes what Denise was saying about anxious parents trying to control the therapy, and it revs it up times 10, because wherever they're going, it's like, this has to be the one that works. This is the last stop on the train, because the last one was the last stop on the train too. So massive doses of self-compassion and a willingness to get treatment for yourself to deal with the fact that you missed out on a developmental phase and that there's some repair for you to do. And in that therapy, you might learn that it's time to make an adjustment away from taking full responsibility for your adult children's OCD and modeling a kind of freedom for them that's attractive, that might make them view you as something other than the person that they're dependent on. It's very painful to do. It is a massive exposure, but it's the best shot I think you have at getting an adult child to actually turn around.
And we're getting definitely some parent here sitting here with the discomfort is so hard, but necessary to help them. Someone else wrote, yes, sitting with the discomfort as a parent is so hard, and giving space, getting some good support is good for us. Mm-hmm. So definitely resonating. Denise or Allie, any?
Yeah. I was just going to say, also, I talk about the therapeutic relationship with patients, as is the same with parents. There is so much terrible parent shaming happening out there, and people parents being told, you should have done this. Why didn't you do this? Why are you doing this? I preface a lot of the times when I'm starting to work with parents, like, I have my own lived experience with OCD. I was a kid and a teen. I was a high-key school refuser. My parents had to lure me out, and my parents did everything they could out of love for me. And at the same time, we didn't get connected with evidence-based care till I was 25. But I know that they were doing the very best they could with the information that they had at the time, and I do not blame them. And if I ever met with a provider who said otherwise, that was like, oh yes, this is I would immediately walk out, because that's just not true. And I feel like that's going to be a key piece with working with parents, is dismantling that shame of the shoulda, coulda, woulda. And also that, yes, this is going to be anxiety provoking. This makes sense. This is your child. What is more important to you in the world? Of course, this is going to be challenging to watch these things. And I don't blame you one bit. And with that being said, giving them the psychoeducation is so important, just like with patients, of like, and this is why we're doing what we're doing. This is the long-term outcome that we're looking for. I know there's a lot of unlearning, right, of what you've been told by probably a ton of people, anyone under the sun that has an opinion about parenting. And it's going to be really weird and wonky, and that's the expectation. right? That we're unlearning these things and we're relearning these things, and just making sure that they know that this isn't being done through the lens of like shaming or being like, why are, this is why their kid is struggling. Absolutely not. So that's something that I really like to highlight with parents.
Right. I mean, I feel like what the first thing I try to do is be like, say, you got your child here. Like you did it right. Like this is, I'm so grateful that you did. And like, let's work together. It's all collaboration. It's all teamwork. It's so what Allie said, you did the best you could with what you had at any given moment. Like enough said, right? I got 3 kids, 3 cases of OCD in my family. Like, I know how this goes. And just to like shame, there's no place for shame here. But I feel like OCD like breeds shame, right? So we do have to do that self-compassion, normalization, and then like, yeah, like, so let's talk about why it doesn't work. Like loving your child, of course you're trying to help them get out of pain. And let's talk about why it might work in the short run and why it doesn't work in the long run and how scary it is to change that pattern of accommodation, right? Like, and even though we know it intellectually, parents are like, I know I shouldn't do it, but I'm like, yeah, because it's terrifying. You're worried of a tantrum. You're worried your child's going to hurt themselves. You're worried you're going to push them over the edge. Like, of course you are. So let's talk about, I'm going to be there with you step by step. I'm going to help you get through it all, because the parents are your partners. And the thing, like, what do you do when your child is unwilling? Everything that John said and Allie said, but it's also I'm going to highlight, find where you are accommodating and get some support to try to change that accommodation process, because sometimes that's allowing your child to not experience the full consequence of having OCD, which might be hurting their motivation to get into the treatment. You can't pull the plug on it completely all at once. That's cruel, but get some consultation about how you can proceed thoughtfully and carefully and in collaboration with your adult child.
We see this at the hospital fairly regularly with young adults who have become very attached to being able to ask their parents questions all the time whenever they're feeling discomfort, to text them about that discomfort all the time. And this is one of the first things we do, or sort of join their family system and say, you know what, parents, they're with us now. They have a full day of treatment. There's nothing they could possibly need from you that they can't get from us right now, including if they're not safe. We have ways of keeping them safe. We have nurses. We can send an inpatient, whatever we need to do to keep your child safe. We are on top of this. So they might be texting you throughout the day. This is terrible. It's too hard. I hate this. You want to send here all this stuff. I'm talking about adults, but usually with the kids, they don't have their phones. But the parents need that permission to say, you don't have to respond to those texts. You can respond to those texts maybe under certain guidelines during what would normally be called visiting hours, but they're in treatment. And by responding to all those texts and trying to talk them down and trying to convince them they belong here, you're basically saying that you agree with them that they can have one foot in treatment and one foot at home. And that's not the same thing as being admitted. So,
and this might seem a bit nepotism, but my mom left a comment. She never leaves a comment. So I'm gonna highlight it, which is the biggest relief for us was when Ethan's therapist told us that it was not our fault and to let Ethan deal with his OCD. Step back and treat him as an adult. Not easy, but a therapist's guidance was just so important. It gave us courage to help Ethan properly. You have to be strong. It works. Thanks, Mom. That is true. I remember seeing the relief on their face when they felt this immense guilt for waiting 31 years to find treatment and realizing that they had done nothing wrong but try to be the best possible parents they could be. And that was a huge relief. I know we're coming up on the end. I do want to pose a final question to everyone for final thoughts, which is, for the individuals that are watching tonight and our viewers that may be wondering if they can get better, if treatment does work, if this is truly a chronic illness, you have to fight as hard as you do every day for the rest of your life, what would you say to them? Lots of questions in there, but just wanted to get things started. I'll start with Ez.
I think the most important thing about the question of will I ever get better is that it's not the right question to ask. It's a yes or no question. Yes, I will get better. No, I will get better. And something that I've had to grapple with is that it's not a yes or no question. It's how much better will I get? And part of that you have to answer for yourself. It does take hard work and motivation. That's where the values comes in. That's where compassion for yourself and slow and steady wins the race being your mentality, and that everyone's journey looks different. It's never linear. I've not met a single person where they're like, it's a straight line. For me, it was like a roller coaster. And at the end of the day, I still can say that with all of the ups and downs, I made progress, and progress doesn't look the same in everyone. But I think avoiding it as a yes or no question is my first thought. And then also that I think having OCD and even that recent diagnosis of OCD, you forget sometimes, I forget sometimes, but how lonely it felt before I was diagnosed and before I met and saw people who had OCD, and how isolated I felt. And my advice is that remind yourself that there are people who care about you and love you. And when you are on that road to recovery, you will be able to see that more and more. And so that's another reason to motivate yourself to recover.
Thank you, Az. John.
Chronic isn't terminal. Chronic means that you get better and better and better, and you develop more and more mastery. It means your life never stops getting better. So we all have all kinds of chronic issues, not just our OCD. We have sort of chronic traits that we've inherited from our parents or we picked up at school or things like that, and we work with them. And the goal is to really kind of maximize, like create an environment for yourself, whether that's in your relationships or in your work or elsewhere. Create an environment where you can maximize your assets and minimize your liabilities. And so I think it's really exciting when you're working with OCD and you start to get better. The thought process should be, it could keep getting better from here, right? I totally agree with Ez that it's not going to be this straight line. It's going to be very bumpy, but up and down kind of thing. But if the general trajectory is positive, that's pretty cool. So I think that's a nice place to position ourselves.
Thank you, John. Denise.
If someone asks me whether or not they can get better from OCD, I do say, I say the data supports the fact that this is a very, very effective treatment. So let's go with that. But in my 25 years of working with this, like I can say that people get well, and it's not a job I could be doing at the rate at which I'm doing it if it wasn't hopeful. And, like, let's just get started and see, this is something that, there's uncertainty about, which is very difficult. And it's like, let's just get uncomfortable being uncomfortable. Like, let's just practice getting comfortable being uncomfortable, and the rest will, that's the beginning part, and then we'll take it where we take it. But I think there is enormous hope here. I see it every single day in my practice, and I do try to spread that. Will it be easy? Absolutely not. But if we work together and do the evidence-based things, and we, sort of do our thing together, like, yes, I do believe your life will get better.
Thank you, Denise. Ali.
Yeah, when people ask me about treatment and like have anxiety around treatment, knowing that we're working with a population that has a disorder that's, all around fears around uncertainty and risk, starting treatment is those things. And so I'm like, it actually would probably be stranger to me if you weren't anxious about doing treatment, because that doesn't fit. And with that being said, I think it's like, for me, at least when I pursued treatment, I was like, I have done so many things and I want my life back. Right. And as far as like, does things get better? I'm like, yes. But I think what's even more important is that it's possible to get your life back in the things that you love, and to have meaning and purpose again in areas that maybe OCD has taken those things away. As far as, I also have people asking me, like, so does that mean you're doing like daily exposures? Like, am I going to do what I was doing in residential every day for the rest of my life? I'm like, again, I leave a touch of uncertainty of like, hard to say, but for me, it's more so that it has changed my worldview, the lens through which I see the world, OCD or not. After doing ERP has shifted. My relationship with anxiety has shifted. I think this idea of being cured is definitely an illusion. People will also ask me like, oh, when's the last time you had an intrusive thought? I'm like, I don't know, 30 minutes ago. But as far as my turnaround time of getting back on track, and my ability to show up fully as myself, that is night and day compared to before treatment. So
Thank you, Ali. And I'll end with, I think that this treatment and this information is such an incredible learned superpower. And I say that because I've actually been dealing with some health stuff. It isn't super public, but I'll talk about it at some point. And, there's a lot that goes into dealing with it and managing it and coping with it and tests and imaging and all kinds of stuff. And I started reflecting on my own journey with this. And then I started thinking about my OCD. And it was really powerful because when my OCD flared up, I didn't have to get blood work. I didn't have to get imaging. I had the power to rewire my brain on my own. And that was so empowering. That was such an amazing realization to go, oh, wow, I don't have to go see a doctor. Like, once you've had some treatment and some understanding, I don't have to go to a hospital. I don't have to get tests. All I have to do is do what I've learned. And I can change my own reactions to my thoughts and behaviors and how I respond to my emotions. And I mean, when you realize that the power is within you to make those decisions, it's so empowering. And so while I'm not grateful, I'm not super thankful for OCD or having it. I wouldn't change anything. And I feel very fortunate that it is as treatable as it is if you really surrender to the process and really live an uncertain lifestyle. So with that, I want to thank our amazing panel, Denise, John, Ez, and Ali. Thank you all so much for being here. I also want to thank all of you. We had an incredible turnout tonight. Thank you for your advocacy, for your conversation, for blaming me for multiple triggers. I've read all your comments. So thank you so much for all of you. As always, I want to thank the IOCDF and Boris behind the scenes for being here. Real quick, just some wrap-up notes. Tomorrow, 12 p.m. Eastern, Ask the Experts with Dr. Liz and Chris. The IOCDF is a donor-supported nonprofit. Please consider making a donation at iocdf.org/donate. As always, if you want to see these more often, you could subscribe on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Twitch. You'll be notified when we go live. We'd love to see you here. Any comments, questions, concerns, thoughts, support, you can visit iocdf.org or you can email the IOCDF at info@iocdf.org. With all of that, thank you so much for spending your Tuesday evening with us. We appreciate you greatly. Have a wonderful, beautiful week. Stay safe, stay vigilant, feel the feels, don't let OCD off the hook, and we will see you tomorrow. Thanks so much. Have a beautiful rest of your evening.